Flight 445 from New York's JFK Airport to London. Heathrow was fully booked on that Tuesday evening in late September, carrying 212 passengers across the Atlantic for the overnight journey. Aaron settled into his seat in 22B, preparing for the 7-hour flight with his laptop and travel pillow. The Boeing 777 was modern and comfortable, and the crew seemed experienced and professional. Everything felt routine, safe, ordinary as passengers found their seats and stowed luggage. Among the boarding passengers was an elderly woman, perhaps 75 years old, moving slowly down the aisle with a cane, helped by a flight attendant to her seat in 18C. She smiled and thanked the attendant graciously, settling in with the careful movements of someone managing arthritis. Nobody paid her much attention. She was just another elderly passenger on a transatlantic flight. Nobody could have guessed that in 90 minutes, this unassuming grandmother would ask a question that would expose a terrorist plot and save everyone aboard. Flight attendant Sarah Mitchell greeted passengers with her practiced warmth as they boarded. 28 years old with 5 years of flying experience, Sarah loved her job despite the challenges. The elderly woman who'd needed help to her seat had been particularly kind, thanking Sarah profusely and complimenting her assistance. Sarah made a mental note to check on her during the flight, as elderly passengers sometimes needed extra attention on long international routes. The woman whose boarding pass showed her name as Vera Patterson seemed sweet, a little nervous about flying perhaps, but otherwise completely ordinary. Sarah had no reason to suspect that Vera Patterson would soon become the most important passenger she'd ever serve. The flight pushed back on schedule and took off smoothly into the darkening sky, climbing through scattered clouds toward cruising altitude over the Atlantic. Captain James Henderson and his first officer completed their post-takeoff checks and settled in for the routine overnight crossing. In the cabin, passengers adjusted to the flight, some sleeping immediately, others watching movies or reading, business travelers pulling out laptops to work. The cabin lights dimmed for the overnight flight. Flight attendants began preparing for dinner service. Everything was perfectly normal, routine, safe. But in seat 18C, Vera Patterson sat with growing concern, her sharp eyes having noticed something during boarding that troubled her deeply. Vera was not just any elderly passenger. Before retiring 15 years ago, she'd worked for 40 years as a chemical engineer for a major pharmaceutical company, specializing in volatile compounds and safety protocols. Her expertise had been in identifying dangerous chemical interactions, preventing industrial accidents, ensuring that incompatible substances were never stored together. She'd retired with commendations for preventing several potential disasters through her meticulous attention to detail and her encyclopedic knowledge of chemical properties. That knowledge had faded somewhat with age, but the instincts remained sharp, and those instincts were screaming at her now. During boarding, Vera had noticed a passenger 3 rows ahead, a man in his 30s traveling alone in seat 15D. He'd stored a small carry-on bag in the overhead bin directly above Vera's seat. Nothing unusual about that. Passengers stored bags wherever space was available. But as the man had lifted his bag, Vera had caught a glimpse inside through a partially open zipper. She'd seen 2 bottles, clearly labeled though the man had tried to conceal them. The labels had made Vera's blood run cold because she recognized the chemicals named on them: hydrogen peroxide at high concentration, and acetone. Separately, these were legal, common substances. Together, under the right conditions, they could create an extremely powerful explosive compound. But wait, here's what made Vera hesitate to say anything. She was 75 years old. Her eyesight wasn't perfect. She'd only glimpsed the bottles for a second. Maybe she'd misread the labels. Maybe they weren't the chemicals she thought. Maybe the man was just carrying cleaning supplies or beauty products. Hydrogen peroxide was used in hair dye, acetone in nail polish remover. Maybe her old retired brain was seeing danger where none existed. She didn't want to cause a scene, to accuse an innocent man, to be the crazy old lady who panicked over nothing. So she sat in her seat, wrestling with uncertainty, trying to convince herself she was wrong. 90 minutes into the flight, after dinner service had been completed, and most passengers had settled into sleep, Vera couldn't ignore her concerns any longer. The unease had grown from a small worry to a consuming conviction. Those bottles, those specific chemicals in those quantities stored together in a carry-on bag, it was exactly the kind of setup she'd spent 40 years preventing in industrial settings. If someone mixed those chemicals with the right catalyst, and in the right proportions, the resulting explosive compound could blow a hole in the fuselage. Vera knew she had to say something, even if it meant embarrassing herself. Even if it turned out to be nothing. She pressed her call button. Sarah responded to the call light from 18C. "Yes, Mrs. Patterson? What can I help you with?" Vera looked up at the young flight attendant and felt suddenly foolish. How did you tell someone you suspected terrorism based on a glimpse of bottles? But Sarah's kind face gave Vera courage. "Dear, I need to tell you something, and I'm afraid you'll think I'm a silly old woman, but I worked as a chemical engineer for 40 years, and during boarding I saw something that concerns me very much. Sarah's training immediately kicked in. When a passenger said they were concerned about something they'd seen, you listened. What did you see, Mrs. Patterson? Vera explained quietly, her voice steady despite her nervousness. The man in seat 15D, 3 rows ahead, has a bag in the overhead bin above me. When he was putting it away, I saw inside briefly. There are 2 bottles, one labeled hydrogen peroxide, concentration I believe was 35% or higher, and another labeled acetone. Sarah, those chemicals together can be used to create TATP, triacetone triperoxide. It's a highly unstable explosive compound. During my career, we had extensive training on identifying dangerous chemical combinations because industrial accidents involving these substances are catastrophic. If someone is carrying those chemicals on this plane, I'm very concerned about why. You won't believe how Sarah responded. She didn't dismiss Vera as paranoid. She didn't tell her she was probably mistaken. Instead, Sarah's face went pale and serious. Mrs. Patterson, thank you for telling me. Please stay seated and remain calm. I'm going to alert the captain immediately. Do not discuss this with anyone else. Sarah walked quickly, but calmly toward the cockpit, her mind racing. TATP. She'd heard of it in security training. Terrorists had used it in multiple attacks. The shoe bomber, the London transit bombings, other attempts. It was known as Mother of Satan among bomb makers because it was extremely powerful but incredibly unstable. If Vera was right, if someone was carrying the ingredients for TATP on this flight, they were all in mortal danger. Sarah knocked on the cockpit door with the emergency pattern. Captain Henderson opened it immediately. What's wrong? Sarah explained rapidly about Vera's observation, about the chemicals, about TATP. Henderson's expression turned grim. Are you certain this passenger is credible? Sarah nodded. She's a retired chemical engineer with 40 years' experience. She knows what these chemicals can do. Captain, I think we need to take this seriously. Henderson made an immediate decision. I'm declaring an emergency and diverting to the nearest suitable airport. That's Reykjavik, Iceland. We're about 40 minutes out. Get me everything you can on the passenger in 15D without alerting him that we're suspicious. Henderson immediately radioed air traffic control. Gander Center, Flight 445 declaring emergency. We have a suspected explosive device on board, requesting immediate priority routing to Reykjavik, Iceland and law enforcement response on arrival. The controller's voice came back instantly, professional but tense. Flight 445, roger, emergency. You're cleared direct Reykjavik descending to flight level 330. All traffic is being cleared from your path. Icelandic authorities and bomb disposal are being notified. Maintain radio contact. Sarah pulled up the passenger manifest on her tablet. Seat 15D. David Walsh, traveling alone. Ticket purchased 3 days ago with cash. No checked baggage. One-way ticket. Every detail screamed potential threat. Sarah relayed this to Henderson, who forwarded it immediately to authorities. That's a classic terrorist profile, Henderson said grimly. Single mail, cash purchase, one-way ticket, last-minute booking. Combined with your passenger's observation about the chemicals, I'd say we have a credible threat. We need to secure that passenger and the bag without causing panic or giving him a chance to detonate if there's a device. Henderson called his senior flight attendant, Marcus Chen, to the cockpit and briefed him on the situation. We need to immobilize the passenger in 15D and secure the overhead bin above row 18 without alerting him or causing panic in the cabin. How do we do that? Marcus thought quickly. We tell passengers we're experiencing pressurization issues and everyone needs to stay seated. We get air marshals, we have 2 on this flight, to position near 15D. Then we have Sarah ask Walsh to help her with something in the galley, get him away from his seat, and marshals take him down there. Once he's secured, we can deal with the bag. The plan was executed within minutes. Sarah made an announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a minor technical issue requiring us to divert to Reykjavik, Iceland. This is purely precautionary. Please remain seated with seatbelts fastened while we sort this out. Flight attendants, please take your seats. The cabin stirred with confusion and mild concern, but no panic. Most passengers assumed it was a routine mechanical issue. Marcus quietly alerted the 2 air marshals about the situation. They positioned themselves casually near row 15. Sarah approached David Walsh with a smile. Excuse me, sir. The captain needs to verify some information about your ticket. Could you come with me to the front galley for just a moment? Walsh looked annoyed but unbuckled and followed Sarah forward. The moment he entered the galley, the 2 air marshals moved in from behind. Federal air marshals, put your hands behind your back. Now. Walsh's eyes widened in shock and fear. What? Why? I didn't do anything. The marshals weren't interested in conversation. They cuffed him quickly and efficiently, searching him for detonators or triggers. They found a cell phone with a timer app open, set to go off in 3 hours. Walsh started shouting. You can't do this. I have rights. This is illegal. The marshals dragged Walsh to the rear galley and secured him there, while Sarah and Marcus carefully approached the overhead bin above row 18. Vera watched from her seat, her heart pounding, praying she'd been right to speak up and not overreacting to nothing. Marcus opened the bin slowly, located Walsh's bag, and carefully removed it without jostling it. He carried it to the front galley, walking with careful, deliberate steps, and placed it in a contained area away from passengers. If it exploded now, at least the damage might be minimized. The bomb disposal team in Reykjavik would handle it properly once they landed. Henderson pushed the aircraft to maximum safe speed, descending rapidly toward Iceland. Every minute felt like an hour. If the chemicals in that bag were stable for now, they'd remain stable. But TATP was notoriously unstable. Vibration, temperature changes, even static electricity could trigger detonation. They were essentially flying with a bomb on board, praying it wouldn't explode before they could get it off the aircraft. Henderson kept his hands steady on the controls and his voice calm on the radio, but internally he was terrified. 212 lives depending on reaching Reykjavik before something went catastrophically wrong. Aaron and the other passengers sensed something more serious than a minor technical issue was happening. The tension among flight attendants was palpable. The diversion to Iceland seemed sudden and unexplained. Some passengers were getting agitated, demanding more information. Sarah made another announcement, carefully worded. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're making a precautionary landing in Reykjavik due to a security concern. Please remain calm and seated. Everything is under control. We'll be on the ground in approximately 20 minutes. The word security concern sent ripples of fear through the cabin. Security concern could mean many things, few of them good. The descent into Reykjavik was tense and silent. Passengers stared out windows, gripped armrests. Some prayed quietly. Vera sat in 18C feeling the weight of responsibility. If she was right, she'd saved everyone. If she was wrong, she'd caused an international incident, diverted a flight, and traumatized 200 people over nothing. But as she replayed the glimpse of those bottles in her mind, her chemical engineering expertise confirmed what her instincts had told her. Those chemicals, in that combination, in those quantities, were not innocent. Someone had boarded this plane intending to destroy it. The landing in Reykjavik was smooth despite the high stress in the cockpit. Emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft the moment it stopped. Fire trucks, ambulances, police cars, and most importantly, the bomb disposal unit in protective suits. Icelandic authorities boarded immediately. David Walsh was removed first, still shouting about his rights, still claiming innocence. The bomb disposal team carefully retrieved the bag from the galley and transported it to a secure area far from the terminal. Passengers were evacuated quickly and orderly, not told yet what had happened, just moved to safety while the aircraft was secured. 2 hours later, Icelandic authorities held a press conference. The bomb disposal team had carefully analyzed the contents of Walsh's bag. Inside, they'd found 4 bottles, 35% hydrogen peroxide, acetone, sulfuric acid, and hexamine, along with detailed instructions for mixing these ingredients to create TATP explosive. The timer on Walsh's phone had been set to remind him when to mix the chemicals and where in the flight to position the device over the Atlantic, far from any possible emergency landing, where an explosion would send the aircraft into the ocean with no survivors. David Walsh was not an innocent passenger carrying cleaning supplies. He was a terrorist who'd planned to murder 212 people and whose plot had been thwarted by a 75-year-old retired chemical engineer who'd paid attention to a glimpse of bottles during boarding. Vera Patterson was escorted to the press conference, still in shock over how close they'd all come to dying. The Icelandic Minister of Justice called her a hero. Mrs. Patterson's specialized knowledge and her courage to speak up despite uncertainty saved every person aboard Flight 445. She represents the best of civilian vigilance. When you see something, say something. This is not just a slogan. Mrs. Patterson embodied that principle and prevented a massacre. Vera, modest and overwhelmed, simply said, "I just did what any responsible person would do. I saw something concerning and reported it. I'm grateful I was wrong about being wrong." But authorities confirmed she'd been absolutely right. David Walsh was identified as a member of a terrorist cell that had been planning attacks on transatlantic flights. He'd been recruited online, radicalized over 2 years, and had received detailed instructions on building TATP-based bombs specifically designed to evade airport security. The liquid components he'd carried were in containers small enough to pass the 3-ounce rule, and individually, they weren't flagged as dangerous. Only combined did they become lethal. Walsh had planned to mix them mid-flight in a lavatory, create the explosive device, and detonate it over the Atlantic. His capture led to a wider investigation that rolled up his entire cell, preventing other planned attacks. Sarah Mitchell hugged Vera at the press conference, tears streaming down her face. "You saved my life. You saved everyone. I don't know how to thank you." Vera patted Sarah's hand. "An old woman tells you she's concerned about chemicals, and you took me seriously. Many people would have dismissed me.
You believed me and acted immediately. We saved each other. That's how it works." Sarah nodded through her tears. "I almost didn't take it seriously. I almost thought you were just nervous about flying. But something in your voice, your certainty, made me listen. Thank God I did." Captain Henderson sought out Vera as well. "Mrs. Patterson, I've been flying for 30 years. I've handled emergencies, equipment failures, medical crises, but I've never been as scared as I was tonight, knowing we had an explosive device on board and praying we'd reach land before it detonated. Your knowledge and your courage gave us the chance to land safely. You saved 212 lives, including mine. Thank you doesn't seem adequate, but thank you." Vera smiled gently. "Captain, you flew that plane masterfully under terrible pressure. The credit belongs to all of us working together. I saw something." Sarah listened. "You acted. The marshals secured the threat. That's teamwork, not individual heroism." Aaron, who'd been terrified during the diversion and evacuation, learned the full story from Icelandic authorities and immediately began documenting it. He interviewed Vera extensively. "What made you speak up despite your uncertainty?" he asked. Vera thought carefully before answering. "I've lived 75 years. I've made mistakes. I've been wrong about things. But I've also learned that some mistakes are acceptable, and others aren't. Being wrong about a security concern is an acceptable mistake. Embarrassing maybe, but acceptable. Staying silent when my expertise suggested danger was not acceptable. If I'd been wrong, the worst outcome would be an inconvenienced flight and an innocent man questioned. If I'd been silent and right, 212 people would die. That's not a risk I could live with. So I spoke up."
Aaron's article, titled "The Grandmother Who Saved Flight 414, How Chemical Engineering Knowledge Stopped a Terrorist," went viral globally. It detailed Vera's career, her expertise, the glimpse of bottles that had alarmed her, her decision to speak up despite self-doubt, and the chain of events that followed. Readers were moved by Vera's humility and her expertise, by the reminder that specialized knowledge matters, that professionals never fully retire their skills, that paying attention to details can save lives. "Vera Patterson is proof that vigilance is everyone's responsibility," Aaron wrote. She wasn't a security guard or law enforcement. She was a retired grandmother flying to visit family, but her expertise recognized danger and her courage reported it. That's the model of civic responsibility: seeing something, trusting your knowledge, speaking up despite uncertainty. The aviation industry took immediate notice. Airlines worldwide enhanced training for flight attendants on recognizing suspicious chemical combinations. Chemical engineers and scientists were recruited to help develop better screening procedures for liquid explosives. Vera's case became a training example. Civilian passengers with specialized knowledge are resources that should be valued and listened to when they express concerns. "Mrs. Patterson represents the eyes and ears we need," a TSA official stated. "Millions of passengers fly daily. Some of them have expertise in areas we don't. When they see something concerning, we need them to speak up and we need to listen." 6 months after the incident, Vera was awarded the Presidential Citizens Medal at the White House for preventing a terrorist attack. At the ceremony, the president honored her courage and expertise. Vera Patterson embodies the vigilance and civic responsibility that keeps our nation safe. Her specialized knowledge, maintained throughout retirement, gave her the ability to recognize danger others might miss. Her courage to speak up despite self-doubt saved 212 lives. She reminds us that safety is a shared responsibility, that expertise matters, and that ordinary citizens can be extraordinary heroes. Vera accepted the medal with grace, then used her moment at the podium to emphasize a message she felt was crucial. "I want to say something to everyone watching, especially to older people, to retirees, to anyone who thinks their skills don't matter anymore because they're no longer working. You matter. Your knowledge matters. Your experience matters. I retired 15 years ago, but I never retired my brain. The chemical engineering knowledge I gained over 40 years didn't disappear when I left my job. It was still there, still valuable, still relevant when needed. So please don't diminish yourself because you've retired. Stay sharp, stay engaged, pay attention. You never know when your expertise might save lives. Mine did. Yours might someday too." The speech resonated deeply with retirees worldwide who'd felt diminished or irrelevant after leaving their careers. Vera received thousands of letters from former professionals, engineers, doctors, teachers, scientists, thanking her for reminding them that their knowledge and skills still had value. Many began volunteering in their fields, offering expertise to schools and community organizations, staying mentally active and socially engaged. Vera had sparked a movement, reminding an entire generation that retirement from work wasn't retirement from relevance. Sarah Mitchell stayed in contact with Vera, visiting her in Connecticut several times a year. Their bond, forged in crisis, had deepened into genuine friendship. Sarah brought Vera small gifts from her travels, and Vera treated Sarah like a granddaughter. At one visit, 3 years after Flight 445, Sarah told Vera something important. You changed how I do my job. Before that night, I saw my role as providing service, drinks, meals, comfort. Now I see it as protection. I pay attention to passengers differently. I listen when they express concerns. I take security seriously in a way I didn't before. You taught me that flight attendants are the frontline defense, that we need to value passenger observations, especially from people with expertise. You made me better at my job. Vera smiled. And you taught me that speaking up matters. I was so afraid of being wrong, of being dismissed as a paranoid old woman. But you listened. You took me seriously. You acted. Sarah dear, in a world where people often dismiss the elderly or experts who've retired, you showed respect for experience. That matters so much. Thank you for listening to me that night. They hugged, two women from different generations and backgrounds, connected forever by a moment when expertise met danger and courage met respect, saving hundreds of lives. 10 years after Flight 445, Vera Patterson was 85 years old, and still sharp, still engaged, still paying attention to the world around her. She'd become an advocate for STEM education, speaking at schools about the importance of chemistry and engineering, inspiring young people, especially girls, to pursue technical fields. You never know when your knowledge will matter, she'd tell students. I studied chemistry because I found it fascinating. I worked in chemical engineering because I enjoyed solving problems. I never imagined that 40 years later, that knowledge would save 200 lives on an airplane. But it did. Your education matters. Your expertise matters. Develop it, maintain it, use it for good. Students loved Vera, this tiny elderly woman with the gentle voice and the incredible story. She brought her Presidential Citizen's Medal to show them, but she always emphasized that the medal represented something bigger than one person. This medal is for everyone who pays attention, everyone who trusts their expertise, everyone who speaks up despite fear of being wrong, everyone who listens when someone raises a concern. This medal is for teamwork. My observation, Sarah's response, Captain Henderson's action, the marshal's intervention. We saved those lives together. That's the lesson. We need each other. Expertise plus communication plus action equals safety. Aaron continued following Vera's story, writing updates on the 10th and 15th anniversaries of Flight 445. His articles traced how one moment of vigilance had rippled outward, improved airline security, enhanced chemical screening, a movement encouraging retirees to stay engaged, a generation of students inspired to study chemistry and engineering because of Vera's example. Vera Patterson was just a passenger, Aaron wrote in his 15-year retrospective, but her 40 years of professional expertise and her willingness to speak up transformed her from passenger to protector. She saved 212 lives with knowledge and courage, and in the 15 years since, she's inspired thousands to value expertise, to stay vigilant, to speak up when they see danger. That's legacy, not just one heroic act, but a lifetime of impact radiating outward, teaching others, changing systems, making the world measurably safer. David Walsh, the would-be terrorist, was convicted on 17 counts, including attempted murder, terrorism, and conspiracy. He received life in prison without possibility of parole. At his sentencing, the judge referenced Vera specifically. Mr. Walsh, your plot was sophisticated, carefully planned, designed to evade security measures. It should have succeeded. But it didn't, because one alert passenger possessed the exact expertise needed to recognize what you were carrying. You thought you were clever, but you weren't clever enough. Mrs. Vera Patterson was smarter, more observant, and infinitely braver than you. Your failure is her triumph. You will spend the rest of your life in prison contemplating how a 75-year-old grandmother defeated your terrorism through knowledge and courage. The 212 passengers of Flight 445 formed an association, meeting annually on the anniversary of the diversion to celebrate their survival and honor Vera. At the 15th anniversary gathering, Sarah and Captain Henderson, now retired, organized a surprise for Vera. They'd collected messages from all reachable passengers thanking her for saving their lives, compiled into a beautiful book. Person after person had written about what they'd been able to do with the years Vera had given them. Children raised, careers built, grandchildren met, dreams achieved. You gave us our futures, one passenger wrote. Everything I've done in the past 15 years exists because you paid attention and spoke up. Thank you. Vera, reading through the book with tears streaming down her face, was overwhelmed. She'd understood intellectually that she'd saved lives, but seeing the actual evidence of those lives, the weddings, the babies, the achievements, the simple moments of joy that would have been lost if Flight 445 had exploded over the Atlantic, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. I just did what I thought was right, she told the gathered passengers. But seeing what you've all accomplished, the lives you've lived, the people you've loved, it makes me so grateful I trusted my instincts that night. Your lives, your stories, your futures, This is why expertise matters. This is why speaking up matters. Thank you for showing me the impact of that one decision. 20 years after Flight 445, Vera Patterson passed away peacefully at age 95, surrounded by family. Her obituary was carried by major newspapers worldwide. Vera Patterson, chemical engineer who saved Flight 445. The funeral was attended by hundreds, family, friends, former colleagues, and dozens of passengers from Flight 445 who'd made the journey to honor the woman who'd given them 20 more years of life. Sarah Mitchell gave the eulogy, her voice breaking with emotion. Vera Patterson was brilliant. She was brave, she was humble, and she was vigilant. On September 24th, 20 years ago, those qualities saved my life and the lives of 211 others. Vera saw danger where others saw nothing. She trusted her expertise despite self-doubt. She spoke up despite fear of being wrong. And she changed everything. Not just for us who lived because of her, but for everyone who learned from her example. Vera taught us that expertise never retires, that vigilance is everyone's job, that courage sometimes looks like a grandmother quietly raising a concern to a flight attendant. Vera, thank you for everything, for our lives, for your example, for being exactly who you were at the exact moment we needed you. Rest in peace, knowing that you mattered enormously. Aaron's final article about Vera, published after her death, was titled Remembering Vera Patterson, the Grandmother Who Changed Aviation Security. It traced her entire life, her education, her 40-year career, her retirement, and the single flight that had defined her legacy. Vera Patterson boarded Flight 445 as a passenger. Aaron wrote, "She deplaned as a hero who'd saved hundreds of lives and changed how the world thinks about civilian vigilance and professional expertise. Her legacy isn't just the lives she saved that night, but the systems that changed because of her, the students she inspired, the message she carried for 20 years. Your knowledge matters. Your experience matters. Pay attention. Speak up. Trust yourself." Vera Patterson, quiet grandmother and brilliant chemist, who saw bottles of death in an overhead bin and refused to stay silent. We're all safer because she lived. We're all inspired because she showed us what courage and expertise can accomplish. Thank you, Vera, for everything. The 212 passengers and crew of Flight 445 continued meeting annually even after Vera's death, now honoring her memory alongside celebrating their survival. They established the Vera Patterson Scholarship for women studying chemistry and engineering, ensuring that her legacy would continue inspiring future generations. At the 25th anniversary gathering, Sarah Mitchell, now in her 50s and retired from flying, addressed the assembled group. 25 years ago, Vera Patterson saved our lives, but she also taught us how to live with vigilance, with courage, with the understanding that we all have something valuable to contribute regardless of age or status. I've tried to embody those lessons. I've tried to pay attention, to listen, to trust expertise, to speak up when something seems wrong. I hope you all have too, because that's how we honor Vera, not just by being grateful for the life she gave us, but by living that life in ways that reflect her values. Stay alert, value knowledge, trust your instincts, help others. That's the Vera Patterson way. That's how we make her proud. The group raised their glasses in a toast to Vera, to expertise, to courage, to the elderly woman who'd seen bottles of death and had refused to ignore them. They toasted to life, the 25 years they'd been given, the futures they'd built, the people they'd loved, all because one woman had paid attention and spoken up. They toasted to vigilance, to knowledge, to the power of ordinary people doing extraordinary things when circumstances demand it. And they toasted to Vera Patterson, forever their hero, forever their inspiration, forever the proof that one person's courage can save hundreds. Flight 445, that specific flight that night 25 years ago, lived on in memory and in lessons taught worldwide. In aviation security training, the Vera Patterson case, how civilian expertise prevented catastrophe. In chemical engineering education, recognition of dangerous compounds in unusual settings, the Flight 445 example. In programs encouraging continued engagement of retirees, stay relevant, stay alert, the Vera Patterson story. Her legacy was woven into systems, into training, into cultural consciousness. The elderly woman who'd almost stayed silent, who'd almost dismissed her own expertise, who'd almost convinced herself she was overreacting, but who'd chosen courage over comfort and saved hundreds as a result. Sarah Mitchell kept a photo of Vera on her desk for the rest of her life. Whenever she felt uncertain about speaking up or doubted her own judgment, she'd look at that photo and remember, Vera had been uncertain too. Vera had doubted herself, but Vera had spoken up anyway, and that choice, that moment of courage despite uncertainty, had saved 212 lives and changed aviation security forever. Be like Vera. Sarah would whisper to herself when facing difficult decisions. Trust yourself. Speak up. Act. It became her mantra, her tribute, her way of keeping Vera alive in her daily choices. The bottles that Vera had glimpsed, the hydrogen peroxide, the acetone, the other components of would-be death, were displayed in a museum exhibit on terrorism prevention, along with Vera's Presidential Citizens Medal and a detailed explanation of how her expertise and vigilance had prevented massacre. Thousands of visitors saw the exhibit annually, learning Vera's story, understanding how close Flight 445 had come to disaster, reflecting on their own responsibility to pay attention and speak up. Teachers brought student groups, airlines brought new employees. The exhibit became a pilgrimage site for anyone who believed in the power of ordinary people to do extraordinary things. At age 35, a woman named Jennifer Chen stood before that exhibit with her young daughter. Jennifer had been 7 years old, sitting with her parents in row 23 of Flight 445. She had no clear memory of the flight. She'd been sleeping during most of the crisis, but she knew the story intimately because her parents had told it to her hundreds of times as she grew up. Jennifer had studied chemistry specifically because of Vera, had become a chemical engineer specifically to honor the woman who'd given her a future. Now she taught her own daughter about Vera Patterson, about expertise and vigilance, about the responsibility they all carried to pay attention and speak up. Grandma and Grandpa were on this airplane, Jennifer told her daughter, pointing to the model of Flight 445 in the exhibit, and they almost died. But this woman, she pointed to Vera's photo, she saw something dangerous, and she told the flight attendant. And because she did, Grandma and Grandpa lived, and then I was born, and then you were born. We're here because Mrs. Patterson paid attention. Her daughter wide-eyed studied Vera's photo. She's a hero, Mommy. Jennifer nodded. Yes, baby, she's a hero. And someday, if you see something dangerous, I want you to be brave like Mrs. Patterson. I want you to speak up even if you're scared. Can you promise me that? The little girl nodded solemnly. I promise. That's the legacy of Vera Patterson and Flight 445. Not just 212 lives saved that night, but generations taught to be vigilant, to trust their expertise, to speak up despite fear. Not just one averted disaster, but a culture shift toward valuing civilian knowledge and encouraging active engagement. Not just a grandmother who'd happened to see something, but an inspiration who'd shown the world what one person's courage could accomplish. Vera Patterson had been a passenger, but she'd become so much more, a guardian, a teacher, a symbol of everything society needed in an age of hidden threats and complex dangers. She'd been exactly the right person in exactly the right place, with exactly the right knowledge at exactly the right moment. And she'd used all of that not to stay silent in fear, but to speak up in courage. That's why her story matters. That's why it will always matter. That's why decades from now, people will still tell the story of the grandmother who saved Flight 445 with chemistry knowledge and courage. Because we need to remember that heroism often looks like ordinary people paying attention and speaking up. That's the power we all have. That's the legacy Vera gave us. That's the lesson we must never forget.